We're here with the great Mike Benz, and this is Benny Brews, featuring Hulk Hogan's brand new beer. Real American beer. Mike Benz Cyber.
Hey, great to see you.
Thanks for coming to the Benny Bar.
Oh, this looks
and I just poured the
amazing.
beer on my leg. Don't worry about it. That never happened. We'll cut it out in the edit.
It's like a Viking gauntlet in an ice freezer.
Frosty glass. Thanks, bro. It's great to actually meet you. You've been on the show a couple times. I've seen you on. You've been everywhere, man.
We've done classics. I
Yes.
feel like everyone we've done has been like a comprehensive sweep of the cinematic universe we're drawing.
We did an interview up against a live Trump event. And it was like, can you explain what's happening in this PSYOP in like 45 minutes? You're like, yes, totally. I don't think you were even a quarter of the way through.
No, that's true. I made you a whole slide deck. I had a whole, I had the charts and graphs diagram. I was like, it's always sunny in Philadelphia with it.
So, are they going to let Trump win?
Maybe.
Will they allow it, right?
Maybe. I think it's a tough decision for them on how far they feel they need to go, because there's always a trade-off between control and legitimacy. And there was already a lot of international attention on the 2020 election. It's almost like, could they run COVID back, right? Like, they were able to get away with all the lies with COVID, all the corruption of the institutions, and they pulled it off. But it came at a cost of institutional trust. And to this day, there are lingering questions all over the world in countries around electronic voting machines. Famously in Brazil, we sent our CIA director, Bill Burns, down to Brazil. We sent our Pentagon director, Lloyd Austin. We had the State Department pull favors with Taiwan to get them the parts for electronic voting machines, and Bolsonaro did not want to use them, casted down on the election. We threatened them. We see, in El Salvador, they're talking about it in many countries in the EU. There's a lot of open questions about what really happened in the 2020 election. And just like I'm not totally convinced that they could do a COVID 2.0 right now, because a lot of the people who did go along with it still feel now like there was something fishy about it. I think there's something similar with this election cycle. Now, I do think they will do at least the standard amount of cheating that is now allowed through mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting. I think there are open questions about the security of our voting machines. They've already rigged it at this point by speed naturalizing all of the illegal immigrants who they've shipped here on taxpayer dime through USAID programs and through DHS programs. So, they've already padded it that way. There are open questions about the electronic voting machines. I mean, it could be that we're in an era where there really are no elections anymore. The fact is the DHS agency that's supposed to be in charge of cybersecurity, CISA, is one of the worst places and most corrupt places in our entire government. They were the ones who orchestrated all of 2020 censorship by saying tweets on the internet are an attack on elections if they question election results. And it's made up of CIA and NSA hackers who migrate over to DHS to protect voting machines. Well, hackers' professional jobs are hacking things and then reporting the vulnerabilities. Well, what if the same people who labeled 100% of the repeat misinformation spreaders on Twitter 1.0 and YouTube and Facebook, what if the people whose apparent sole and exclusive purpose in life is to make sure Trump doesn't win the election, and they have proprietary access to be able to hack electronic voting machines and no one can question them because they are literally the Department of Homeland Security, and this is high-level stuff that can be easily compartmentalized so that there's no oversight. What if they simply hack the voting machines, the group that's supposed to be protecting us from hacking? We see this happen all the time. The 2020 election coup simulator, Transition Integrity Project, planned a coup in the guise of a counter coup. They said, how can we structure a domestic color revolution to kick Trump out of office if he clings to power? If he loses the election, doesn't give up power. We need a coup power to stop his coup. But then they screwed up because scenario 3 of their simulation was called clear Trump win. How do we still get him out of office? How do we still make sure he's not inaugurated, even if he clearly wins the election? And so you see this happen time and time again. But I think that the ideal situation, if Trump does win fair and square in the Electoral College, is that they pad the world around him with enough fail-safes. They secure his commitment to infinite funding for Ukraine. They secure his commitment to maximum war with Russia. They secure his cabinet position staffed with blob lackeys that are more loyal to the blob than to the President of the United States. And then simultaneously open several concurrent special prosecutor investigations to make sure the whole term is bogged down in a Mueller probe on steroids. They might settle for that.
This sounds like I've seen this one before. It's a rerun. What's a rerun? Oh wow.
Well, it's a Transformers sequel, so it's bigger, better. It's the same plot line. It's just more explosions.
So they're going to try and do the same thing they did last time. Trump clearly wins in 2016, and they make sure that there are people like John Bolton there holding his nuts.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think it's weird
Nikki
to say
Haley
this.
at State, right? So it's going to be Nikki Haley in charge of State Department.
It's weird to say this, but that's like the best case scenario.
Interesting.
Because I think anything shy of that gets you into assassination town.
Well, I think we're already there. I think the trains hit the station town.
Well, we've already had 2 movies so far, so
That's right.
we're continuing our
talk about
Transformers
sequels.
theme.
Yeah, talk about sequels. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I want to talk about that. But this is going to be wild for everyone to hear. So for Trump to be allowed to become president, you're saying that he's going to have to go through a super state checklist, tick the boxes, hit all the right notes, sing all the right songs to be allowed to become president. I don't think that's how Americans think our system runs, but you're telling me that's actually the only way that Trump's going to be let into the Oval Office again.
Yeah, this is standard fare. I mean, this is what our State Department does in every other election around the world, and they're just doing this here. I mean, we back channel our diplomats, our ambassadors, and our interlocutors back channel with political parties from both sides of the aisle, or 8 sides of an aisle if it's a multi-party democracy, in order to make sure that the party who is going to rise to power is going to formulate their own foreign policy in a way that's consistent with State Department interests. I mean, a great example of this was Zelensky himself. When Zelensky became the prime minister, became the president of Ukraine in 2019, we sent a very clear message to him right when he took office through something that everyone can look up. It's called the Red Lines Memo. If you look up the Ukraine Crisis Media Center Red Lines Memo, and this was a joint signed letter from 26 different octopus arms of the U.S. State Department. These were all NGOs, civil society organizations, university centers, media outlets, humanitarian groups, but all of them are funded either by the State Department directly or USAID, which serves the State Department. So these were just all the different octopus arms within Ukraine, claiming to be Ukrainian civil society, but they're cutouts of the State Department. And they threatened Zelensky the month he took office with something like 43, 45 different red lines that Zelensky could not cross in terms of his policy for the country unless political destabilization would be unleashed on the administration. Now, political destabilization is the reason Zelensky was president in the first place, because this same State Department USAID apparatus pumped $5 billion into the right sector and Azov paramilitaries that surrounded the Parliament building in January 6th, effectively, if you believe that story. But this was an actual one, except it was sponsored by the United States. They literally surrounded the Parliament building. They were throwing Molotov cocktails in police cars. Of course, we reported it was mostly peaceful. And we destabilized the country. Victoria Nuland herself, the Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasian Affairs, and Jeff Pyatt, the U.S. Ambassador, were handing out cookies and water bottles as we did that to destabilize the country, to replace the government. And they said, if you cross any of these red lines, and they were extensive. They were very extensive. It was, you cannot cross this on your oil and gas sector. Here's 7 things you need to do in oil and gas. In the media sector, you are not allowed to have, the Russian-speaking language appear on any public, radio or TV stations. Culture, education, agriculture. It was like a whole list. Security, trade, and it was a threat letter directly that you cannot do those things, or else you will be cooed out of office. And this is what we do everywhere. I can tell a million stories on that, but the fact is it's that same apparatus at home here. And this is simply, we've never had, maybe since Andrew Jackson, a choice between a blob and a non-blob candidate for president. Maybe Pat Buchanan in the early 90s, but he didn't come close. He was, I think, if he had ever gotten somewhere north of 40% in the polls, he would have gotten the call as well. But Trump may have been the first Democratic election that we've had in this country.
That's incredible. JFK?
Well, JFK came from that sort of, Chicago world in class on his way to power, but then he ended up, messing with the bull and getting with the horns when he decided to go against his generals and go against his CIA and go against, this blob apparatus, the foreign policy apparatus, when he gave that, I think it was that famous speech at American University, and basically wanted a détente with Russia, and, the CIA perceived that he totally backstabbed them with the Bay of Pigs. This is why you had the strange Cuban connection with the assassination itself. I mean, you had the CIA opening Lee Harvey Oswald's mail for months before the assassination, and we'll get back to this sort of familiar relationship between the CIA and assassins, I think, in a minute here.
Yeah.
But he was skittish on Vietnam. He was skittish on the war with Russia. I remember when I was a Trump speechwriter, Donald Trump asked me to look up what JFK had to say about his generals.
Wow.
To include in a potential speech. And I remember thinking, what are we up against? Because JFK did not have good things to say about his generals.
To this day, Donald Trump, little chin music to the generals, right? Like often kind of like making fun of them and roasting them. And maybe there's something boiling under the surface there that maybe a lot of people don't understand. I mean, for me, it's shocking to hear somebody who's held all of your positions and have seen what you've seen saying, right now there are all these forces that are going to Donald Trump and saying, this is what you're going to do. So you believe that they're just redlining to Trump right now. The Zelensky visit was just a few days ago.
Right.
So was that a red line?
Well, I think, I made the joke that I'm not sure that Trump and Zelensky could even hear each other in the room, because there was probably 27 different government agency devices all doing feedback against each other when you put multiple microphones next to each other, because the Pentagon's trying to figure out what they're saying, the CIA, the NSA.
It sounds like old dial-up internet.
Exactly. But
get off the line.
Right. Well, Trump has been very close, has kept this closely guarded secret about how exactly he intends to negotiate an end to the war with Russia, because we overthrew the government in Ukraine in 2014 in order to secure our hold over the eastern part of Ukraine and to privatize the assets there and to take all the $14.4 trillion in resources over that portion. And then that party was ruined with this 2022 operation from Russia that ended up seizing a large chunk of the Donbass, which it's the exact area that was of concern in terms of the resource, because most of the population is in the western part of Ukraine, but most of the resources are in the east. And so they invaded the exact resource territory that Burisma had all the mining rights to. Ironically, the shale resources east of the Dnieper River, and then the Black Sea offshore shale resources are now lost because Crimea joined the Russian Federation. So we don't want peace, and by we I mean the State Department, the diplomats, the White House, unless it steps back the world to how it was in 2014. And Russia will not give that back for any number of reasons. One, because they don't have to. They feel like they're winning, or at least have acquired victories in this, and without assurances, and maybe even with assurances, they wouldn't give it back. And so I think this is what's behind the escalation right now with these long-range missiles, precision-guided strikes into Russia itself. Ukraine now doing incursions directly into the Russian Federation territory. I think they are escalating it in order to try to give Russia something to lose, so that when they have these negotiations, they can achieve that. They can reverse the losses and go back to the world as it was immediately post-2014 coup. But so if Trump agrees to a peace deal in the world as it is right now, he might get assassinated. Like if he were to just say, okay, the war's over right now, the world is as it is. The West controls Western Ukraine and parts of Eastern Ukraine, but all of the sections of the Donbass, Crimea, that whole region is now, we're back to the Minsk Accords. We're back to this sort of, a peace thing, and we're going to put down the arms, and we'll go back to relatively normal trading relations. I think if he were to agree to that on the face of it, we'd see what J.D. Vance is like as president of the United States for a period, and then whoever J.D. Vance. I mean, that's what's happening right now with the Ryan Routh Ukraine situation, and that is, it's not an uncommon occurrence anymore. Almost every major political leader of a populist movement in the country, in the world right now, has been physically assaulted, shot, or stabbed. Bolsonaro was stabbed, right in the stomach while he was president, while the State Department was orchestrating this coup to get him out of office. Then they immediately sicked the legal system on him. Right? He's under indictment right now for the way he handled COVID and a dozen other felony counts. So they did the same, shoot, stab, and prosecute that they did to Bolsonaro as to Trump. Shinzo Abe is dead in Japan. The leaders of the AfD party in Germany have been stabbed or shot at in the face or in the body. You've seen the same thing. Imran Khan was stabbed as well, and they did the same thing to Imran Khan. The U.S. State Department, everyone can look this up on The Intercept right now, who published portions of this classified cable that leaked. Imran Khan was the Trump of Pakistan. He was the most popular Pakistani prime minister the country ever had, and he was cooed out of office by the U.S. State Department because, in the State Department's words, he took an aggressively neutral position on Russia and was allowing Pakistan. So Pakistan is the big military transshipment point into Romania and therefore into Ukraine. It's a giant CIA zone. We're going to come to this later in the story when we talk about Ryan Routh, because he was all over Pakistan in this whole operation. But Imran Khan was, again, this popular prime minister. The State Department back-channeled with his diplomats who betrayed him and with the Pakistani ISI, the intelligence service, as well as the Pakistani generals, and threatened them with, quote, carrots and sticks, basically bribes if they impeached Imran Khan out of office in a no-confidence vote. It's basically their version of an impeachment. And that all would be forgiven in Washington if they decided to go through with this vote, and that they would basically be getting billions in aid money if they did it. We basically bribed the sitting factions of the sitting government to oust the government and replace it with a U.S. vassal presidency. And then as soon as Imran Khan was deposed in this no confidence vote, the State Department swooped in and said, you can't hold elections for, because if you hold elections again this year, Imran Khan's just going to win again. Stop me where that sounds familiar. For example, Ukraine has not had an election in 4 years and is not going to have one in the foreseeable future. So tell me if if this starts to sound like a stock and trade of the exact locus targeting Trump, where we just straight up cancel elections. But then immediately is when they canceled elections, they put Imran Khan under indictment. He's currently sitting in a jail cell after being hit with 195 felony charges. Marine Le Pen is currently facing 10 years in prison. Matteo Salvini is currently facing 20 years in prison. The Prime Minister of Slovakia, who also was threatening to make Slovakia no longer a vassal state of Washington foreign policy because Slovakia plays this key role in the pipeline architecture connecting Poland to Ukraine for all the North American gas that they're replacing Russian gas with. So they need Slovakia. Slovakia had a new election. The new guy didn't want to go along with it. Magically, he got shot in the body by a George Soros, ardent reporter and a journalist for a George Soros mag. But once again, you have a blob shooter. But this is now stock and trade. We're told by Matt Gaetz that there's 5 separate assassination teams that are currently hunting down Trump and trying to find angles on him. Of course, the 2 that already happened were solo dolo. No teams there around Matthew Crooks. No teams there around Ryan Routh. But by the way, you can't see the text messages. You can't see the social media. But all 5 they're tracking are in teams. But anyway, I'm sort of digressing there. But yes, I think that the main thing that Trump can or will get assassinated over is his disagreement with the blob on foreign policy as it applies to Eurasia.
So these are warnings, these assassination attempts. Are these warnings to say we can...
I think they were legitimate attempts. So
these weren't like get in line warnings, like this is how close you are. You better sign our red lines, because the infrastructure that you're building here is there's a bag of dirty tricks that are used internationally. Mm. We seldom see them used with such blunt force domestically, because we've never seen something like this so overt in our lifetimes. Perhaps it happens behind the scenes. You made the claim that maybe this is the first democratic election we ever had in 2016.
Yeah.
So maybe it's happened behind the scenes in every election in my and your lifetime. But we haven't never seen it. We've never seen any overt evidence of it that burst forth onto the public scene. And so this is now reaching a point where people are aware that Trump is under attack, that this superstate exists, and that these dirty tricks are not just things that happen, here's a revolution, another revolution around the world. It's happening here. And that's, I think, destabilizing to many Americans.
Well, the behind-the-scenes comment is interesting, because if you actually take a critical lens to looking back at who you've had a choice to vote for over the past 30, 40, 50 years, you start to see a strange pattern. So, let's start with the current president, Joe Biden. I think he's still president. I don't know. It's a little confusing now, actually. He's delegated powers, and so Joe Biden spent 40 years. He became a senator when he ran at 29 years old. He's 80. So for half a century, he was known in Washington, D.C. as Mr. Foreign Policy. Now, remember, the blob is the foreign policy establishment, but it also controls domestic affairs, because you need to control the domestic drivers of foreign policy, because if the domestic populace doesn't want to do it, then you don't get your foreign policy done. But he was Mr. Blob, Mr. Foreign Policy. That's how he was announced by the Council on Foreign Relations in the 1980s. Now, part of this is because he was the chairman for 20 years, either chairman or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is the area in Congress most responsible for oversight of the State Department. It is the State Department portfolio. Joe Biden was the oversight of the State Department for half a century. So you don't even really need to have these sort of Zelensky red lines style back channels, because you're at the cafeteria with him. You see him, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night at your Council on Foreign Relations meetings, and your cocktail party at the Atlanta Council, and your CSIS fundraiser. your whole career is this back channel, assurances about what you're going to do on Ukraine, what you're going to do in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, what you're going to do in the Panama, Canal, crisis in the late 80s. Your whole career is doing favors and putting favors in the favor bank and constantly doing that consensus building. So that's Joe Biden. Remember, Hillary Clinton was the U.S. Secretary of State. So Biden was oversight of the State Department. Hillary Clinton was the head of the State Department. And of course, her husband, Bill Clinton, was also the president, also came through this same network when he was the governor of Arkansas during the Mena, Arkansas CIA operation with Iran-Contra. He happened to be the home state of the main transport point for the Ronald Reagan CIA operations that were the end run of the Democrat-controlled Congress prohibition on overthrowing the government. Well, maybe I'm getting ahead. So let me continue with our chronology here. So John Kerry has also been in the news lately, right? With just like Hillary Clinton, he called for an end to the First Amendment because we need to be able to censor misinformation. John Kerry, of course, ran against George Bush in 2004. John Kerry was the Secretary of State, who was also on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In fact, was also in the same Clinton CIA world, Iran-Contra operation. Everyone right now can look up something called the Kerry Report, which was John Kerry's report to Congress whitewashing the CIA cocaine trafficking scandal. See, it was a big problem when it became public knowledge that the CIA was running crack cocaine into Mena, Arkansas while Bill Clinton was there, and then taking the proceeds of those drug sales to launder it into cash and then buy guns with the cash and then give them to the Nicaraguan Contras, because the Democrat-controlled Congress had just passed something called the Bolin Amendment, which prohibited U.S. dollars from funding that proxy war in Nicaragua. And so the CIA, the military, the National Security Council, the Ronald Reagan Republicans, and the Bill Clinton Democrats did an end run of the Bolin Amendment by raising the money not from U.S. taxpayers, but by selling crack cocaine, effectively, on the streets of Los Angeles and Chicago and Miami. When that all came open, it was a big scandal. The CIA director, John Deutsch, would later have to travel to South Central Los Angeles to an angry crowd and explain that it was just a big misunderstanding, guys. It was just a few loose ends. It's not systematic. But John Kerry whitewashed that in Congress. He was the mop-up man doing the janitorial sweep-up job for the CIA with his Kerry report that effectively absolved in large part the CIA from that. And of course, he did favors for the blob. And lo and behold, he's the guy you can vote for president. So let's look at the Republican side again. Mitt Romney ran for president in 2012 against Barack Obama. We can get to Obama, which is its own thing. But Mitt Romney is on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. That is the CIA, the premier CIA cutout. It is when the Church Committee hearings happened in 1975, 1976. That was when we set up a Senate Intelligence Committee. We had no oversight in Congress of the CIA before that. That's when we set up a House Intelligence Committee. We didn't have one of those until 1975. That was when Operation Mockingbird came out and MK Ultra came out, and the heart gun, the heart attack dart gun from the CIA came out, and all of this. The CIA penetration of journalists and clergy and religious institutions and unions. And so Jimmy Carter rode to power the next year on this left-wing Democrat anger over the intelligence community abuses of the Democrat Party. He did something called the Halloween Massacre, where he laid off 30% of the CIA in a single day and then massively cut their budget. Then he got in trouble with the Iran hostage situation. Ronald Reagan argued on the back of that we needed a red-blooded, full-throated, Wolverine-fanged CIA back again. But the problem was Democrats controlled Congress. And so instead of giving it directly to the CIA, his CIA director, William Casey, wrote a letter to the head of the Justice Department calling to establish a new CIA that would not technically be CIA. It would technically be a private nonprofit, but it would be back-channeled by the CIA. It would be funded entirely by U.S. taxpayers, and it would be accountable to the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And we would call it the National Endowment for Democracy. And it's got two wings. It's got four cores, but the two political wings are called NDI, the National Democratic Institute, and IRI, the International Republican Institute. Hunter Biden, by the way, was on the chairman's advisory board of the NDI. This is, we've talked many times about the Hunter Biden CIA story. Everyone who's curious why the CIA told the Justice Department not to interview, waved off the Justice Department not to interview the man who paid Hunter Biden's taxes for 5 years and bankrolled his whole operation. Well, in addition to everything else in the Hunter Biden story, again, he's on the chairman advisory board of NDI, the premier CIA cutout. It's the CIA wing of the Democrats. Well, Mitt Romney has been for decades on the board of the IRI, the GOP CIA wing. So who ran against Barack Obama on the Republican side in 2008? John McCain. Who is John McCain? Senator John McCain. He's the one who founded the IRI in 1983 in the Reagan administration and ran it for 25 years and only left to run for president against Barack Obama. How about Barack Obama? I mean,
how about Barack Obama? Because that's the one I can't figure out. George H.W. Bush was head of the CIA, right? So it's like all of it locks into place, certainly in our lifetime, certainly in modern history.
Right.
Except for Barack Obama. So how does that get done? My guess, and I can't wait to hear the true answer, which I'm sure you have, my guess would be that they blackmailed him, honestly. I mean, based on the guy's creepy history. But what do I know? How'd they do it? How did they usurp Barack Obama? Because Barack Obama would be like the guy who wanted hope and change and wanted the system, presumably, to not run anymore. Abu Ghraib, like all the scandals that were surrounding the Iraq War, forever war, Barack Obama presumably would be the antithesis of this system. And you're telling me that not only is he part of the system, he's probably running it at this point. So how the hell did that happen?
Well, there's so many CIA connections around Obama, it can sort of make your head spin. So, I mean, starting with his immediate family, his mother was working directly for USAID in Indonesia at the time that the CIA and State Department were effectively operating this massive military operation in Indonesia. And USAID is a CIA front. USAID exists for there's no aid in USAID. Okay. Even the name will fool you. USAID doesn't mean United States aid. It means the Agency for International Development. And international development means capacity building of institutions. It means running money into union groups, media organizations, public health ecosystems, any number, every aspect of society. It's universities, it's NGOs, it's media organizations, it's legal scholars. It capacity builds assets for either the State Department, the Defense Department, or the CIA to play with. That's all it does. There's no aid in it. It is international development of assets. USAID constructs the assets, and then state gets to play with them for diplomacy purposes. The Pentagon gets to play with them for military purposes, or the CIA gets to play with them for covert action purposes. That's the only reason USAID exists and the only reason it's ever existed. And I can go through 24 examples that are might be shocking to the audience, as examples of those CIA fronts. If you're interested, some of them end up right back in our story around Pakistan. In fact, maybe I'll just say, everyone can look up right now. I believe it was 2011 or 2013. I think it may have been 2013. The CIA vaccine clinic that was busted in Pakistan, operating under a USAID front. It was a USAID public health facility to administer vaccines as a public health institution, and it was funded by USAID. And then it was busted by Pakistani intelligence as being a CIA front to collect the biometrics of the entire surrounding population, so that we would, in pursuit of David Petraeus' identity dominance strategy, to collect the biometrics of 85% of the population of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So you had the grant application is going to say, here's $7.5 million to a vaccine clinic in Pakistan to promote public health. But it's a CIA front to collect biometrics. You see this story time and time again. It happened again when in 2014 in Cuba with the HIV clinic. Again, this is a literal example of USAID AIDS. It was an AIDS clinic in Cuba while we were trying to overthrow the Cuban government. So it was supposed to be administering HIV prescription medication.
US AIDS.
But it turned out that the U.S. military was running arms and paramilitary personnel into the clinic under cover of being public health workers and with weapons in boxes that were supposed to be carrying medical supplies. It was a CIA covert action to overthrow the government of Cuba operating out of a USAID HIV clinic. 2019 in Venezuela, the medical trucks that were supposed to be supplying humanitarian aid and medical supplies to dissident groups in Venezuela being oppressed by the Maduro government, when they were stopped at the border check, it was all weapons and explosives that the Pentagon was putting in USAID trucks to run there. But I could go through so many dozens of examples of this. I mean, it's
so. How did they? So you're saying that Obama was fake? So Obama was fraudulent.
Well, but I mean, starting right with his family. I mean, you had. So not only is she working for USAID in the exact CIA conflict zone that was one of the marquee CIA conflict zones of the area, while the USAID was acting as this CIA front, but her money. So she was also funded by the Ford Foundation in the 1970s. The Ford Foundation was busted in the 1970s in the Church Committee hearings as being one of the premier CIA pass-throughs for laundering money. So, when you give someone CIA money, it doesn't come with a wire transfer through the SWIFT account saying, "Hi, this is from the Central Intelligence Agency." It goes through webs of nonprofits and 501c3s. And then it goes from there to pass-throughs, and then it goes on to the intended targets through any number of plausible, deniable, links that are set up. But they were sloppy about this in the 1960s and 70s, and the CIA was giving it directly to the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation was then giving it to the webs of effectively media mercenaries, academic mercenaries. Obama's mother was doing the sociological research on all of the different ethnographic groups in Indonesia at the time that we were fomenting the war and working to sort of balkanize and create these power dynamics among these groups. And she was getting her money from not just the Ford Foundation today, the Ford Foundation in the heat of it being exposed as one of the CIA's top fronts. And then, you've got his whole extended family, and then you get to the you get the Obama-Pakistan situation and the strange event that happened, I believe in something like 2011, where no less than John Brennan, we'll come back to him in the Ryan Routh story, by the way, but John Brennan's private firm was busted hacking into the State Department database and altering Obama's passport information. Now, and they said many passports were altered, so the official story is that his was not targeted in particular. But the fact is John Brennan was then promoted by Obama himself to be the Central Intelligence Agency director. There's a big gap in Obama's resume during his, I believe, sophomore year in college, which, by the way, is a common time for people to be recruited by the agency. If they're going to do a career in the agency, often they're poached out of college, where he spent this mystery year in Pakistan. He had 3 Pakistani college roommates. Now, the whole Pakistan situation is a CIA one. I mean, Pakistan was our zone for running our Afghanistan operation with the Mujahideen in the 1970s. So, a few weeks ago, I did this whole 4-hour lecture on my just subscriber series on X, where I went through Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national security advisor for Jimmy Carter, dropping out of a helicopter and telling the Mujahideen, "We will give you all of the weapons you want, all of the arms, all of the training. Your land is over there. The Soviets are sitting on it. Take it back by force. The Americans will be behind you." It's the same speech that John McCain and Lindsey Graham would later give to the Azov Battalion in 2016. But I literally played the side-by-side. Corporate wants to tell you the difference. Wants you to ask for the difference
in
these pictures.
Right. It's the same picture.
So, but what was happening at the time is we were creating Islamic terrorism. We were creating you had these Shiite factions, and then we were grooming a fundamentalist Islam sect and giving them paramilitary training, giving them arms, giving them rocket launchers, giving them anti-air missiles, in order for them to kill the Russians, and successfully. And the whole thing was based out of the CIA's control over Pakistan, because Pakistan is immediately adjacent to Afghanistan. Much of Afghanistan was occupied by the Soviet Union. And so we created a bank called BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. It was a CIA proprietary bank. It was set up by the CIA with a Pakistan front. And it was, one of its main operations was to launder the drugs on the Golden Crescent that the Mujahideen sat on territorially, because the Golden Crescent there in Afghanistan has the world's most fertile poppy development fields. They have to be grown under very specific conditions, and it's just a magic place for that. And so we funded the Mujahideen with a CIA bank. By the way, tell me if that sounds familiar. I feel like we just went over this story in another hot zone with this drugs for cash for guns operation, which was Iran-Contra and Bill Clinton and George Bush and Ronald Reagan and John Kerry and Bill Barr, by the way, who was involved in that. Bill Barr started his career in the CIA, worked there for 7 years, and was the mop-up man for Iran-Contra there. He was the staff to stymie Congress. But anyway, getting back to this. So we had the CIA paramilitaries train and develop Islamic fundamentalist terrorism in Afghanistan. We had training them in Pakistan and running our arms shipments into Pakistan. In that way, we could move them by land into Afghanistan to our guys. And then we had a proprietary bank, which grew to be one of the largest banks in the world, because unsuspecting other creditors, other depositors, saw this pristine bank that was giving a great return, and all these sovereign governments were participating, the United States, the UK, and then it all went bust when it turned out the whole thing was a giant drug trafficking, black market arms dealing bank, where everything was moving around to these giant Ponzi schemes of CIA funny money. So that whole region is born of CIA paramilitary activity. And Barack Obama, early in his life, he's in college, spends this mystery year. At the same time, John Brennan is there, and at the same time, Zbigniew Brzezinski is there. And then, magically, when he becomes president, the guy who he would tap to be the CIA director before he was the CIA director, because he had worked for the CIA his whole career, and then he started a private firm. That private firm ends up hacking into his passport information. And then he gets made the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. But this all gets back to what happened in the second Fedsination attempt on Donald Trump's life, because we see this exact network and these same players come back in the person of Ryan Routh and his extended network. And we can sort of get to that, or I can talk more about some of this.
Yes. So now we have set up the infrastructure for what is happening to Trump now and why Donald Trump is such an overt threat that has to be dealt with in an overt way. Because for the passive news consumer, the passive American voter, these revelations about our political process are destabilizing. And it's easier to live in the myth that it's two sides that are rightfully fighting against each other.
Coke and Pepsi.
Yeah, Coke and Pepsi, that's right. McDonald's, Burger King. But you're telling me that not only is McDonald's and Burger King the same little small group of people, but also that Barack Obama is one of them. That's insane. I just have to ask a follow-up on Barack Obama, because that's wild. So your contention is that Barack Obama was born of the CIA?
I don't know. What I know is his family. It's rare to see so many constellation points all in one direction, with there being nothing there. Then you have the early life until college. Then you have college. Then you have all the community work, which I mentioned with the Pakistan situation. Then you have his life as a community organizer. Now, community organizing is bread and butter of what intelligence work is. Intelligence work, especially when it has to do with political destabilization, is about working with all the different aggrieved elements in a region, in a country, in a community, in order to organize them politically against the existing government. In fact, many, many times, Saul Alinsky, was a big Obama mentor also, with Hillary Clinton. Many of these groups that Saul Alinsky was working with directly ended up being involved in CIA work. For example, the various Indian tribes that he was involved in organizing ended up being sent down to Latin America or in South America in order to back channel and work with the unions there at the time that the CIA was trying to restabilize our control over those countries. And I mean, I can get into this in a deep way if you want, but effectively you have this whole community organizing career, which again is just, this is what we do. In one recent documentary that I went over with folks on X, we went over the 1999 toppling of Yugoslavia, and what did that involve? That involved community organizing with all the different ethnic groups in what are now the Balkans, because we literally Balkanized them. We created Kosovo. We created this big, ethnic turf war in order to split Yugoslavia into 7 different countries. We pitted the Serbs against the Albanians, against the Kosovars. Of course, the Albanians at the time were operating one of the biggest drug gangs to launder these drug proceeds coming off of the Golden Crescent. And they ended up being one of our main paramilitary forces against Yugoslavia there. But that's community organizing work. You are getting the aggrieved coalition of the fringes aligned like a magnet. Everyone right now can go on YouTube and watch the free documentary called Taking Down a Dictator. And it's basically a PBS documentary narrated by Martin Sheen, which goes through the whole thing. And you'll see the $72 million that the U.S. government paid the Otpor Group, which is now Canvas and plays a strange role, was revived for the Arab Spring when the CIA and State Department were organizing the overthrow of the governments of Egypt and Tunisia and several others. This is stock and trade. And then, Obama was fast-tracked on the foreign policy side in the Senate when he was flying out to Ukraine and doing these back channel, statecraft operations in Ukraine. The fact is you can't, from cradle to middle age, I can't really name a year where Obama was not swimming around the world of international statecraft with a intelligence underside. Now, that doesn't mean that he was, but there's a lot of smoke coming out of the house. And, things like the John Brennan hacking story are extremely strange because John Brennan, and this gets to the Ryan Routh situation, John Brennan has been involved in so many of these dirty tricks that ended up having calamitous collateral damage on the collective soul of this country. John Brennan was the chief of station in Saudi Arabia in the run-up to 9/11. On 9/11, he was the chief of station in Saudi Arabia. Why is that significant? Well, 11 of the 19 hijackers of U.S. airplanes on U.S. soil entered in from the United States, meaning they had visas. Somehow, even though none of them were from here, they all got them from John Brennan's consulate. Effectively, he was the CIA station house head, and the U.S. consulate was all packed with John Brennan people. There's a whistleblower named Michael Springman who wrote a book called Visas for Terrorists. Everyone can look it up, or maybe called Visas for Al Qaeda, but it's colloquially known as Visas for Terrorists. And he described how he was the visa chief, the chief of issuing visas at the State Department consulate in Saudi Arabia in the run-up to 9/11. But that when he arrived there, to his surprise, he learned that he was one of only 3 people in the entire consulate who were actually working for the State Department, even though it was a State Department consulate. He said every other person at the consulate was Central Intelligence operating under a State Department attaché cover, including his boss. The head of the State Department at the consulate, who was his boss as the visa chief, was also working under CIA cover with John Brennan, who was the head of the CIA in the region. And what he describes in Visas for Terrorists is how the State Department consulate, under pressure from the CIA and with the State Department boss also working for the CIA, fast-tracked visas for known terrorists and brought them to the United States over the objections of the State Department visa bureau, and that he himself tried to deny these visas, had his career threatened, had basically his civil, professional life threatened, and then was ultimately fired for refusing to give fast enough approval to John Brennan's terrorists. Now, this was lo and behold, it turned out that 15 of the 19 hijackers, 11 of them were from Saudi Arabia itself, but 15 of them got their visas from Saudi Arabia. Michael Springman also said, we were giving out visas to terrorists in Saudi Arabia who weren't even from Saudi Arabia, weren't even living in Saudi Arabia. We fast-tracked these visas. They were no-look visas. These were people who couldn't say why they were going to the United States, couldn't say a single person they knew there, had no reason, had no background, did not submit work histories or anything like that, and they were on terror watch lists. And John Brennan and the influence network there between the CIA and State Department fast-tracked those visas, and then lo and behold, 15 of the 19 hijackers of the 9/11 airplanes crashing into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon in a field in western Pennsylvania got it from John Brennan's fast-track, no-look visa operation. And yet John Brennan would then come back and have his firm would then hack into the State Department's passport office, alter the passport information. Every one of these, it would seem like it's some sort of federal crime, but he gets promoted his way up power the more dirty deeds he does. Now, should we get to the Ryan Routh thing here? Because it all connects.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Why would they need to change Obama's passport?
Well, if there's information around what he was doing in Pakistan at the time, if there were special markings made on it, for example, there are diplomatic passports. Those are different. Those are an entirely different category. If there was a different life that he was leading from an early age, and there was something in his file which noted that he may have had a civilian passport. And again, this is speculation. I'm not asserting this as fact. Yeah. But this is one of these things that I think, because there were other issues around Obama that were, kind of red meat, I think, for conservatives around. I've never even looked into the birth certificate thing. I don't care about it. I have no idea. There are questions about, what his college grades were. And there are all these questions that just, I think journalists felt like they didn't really have access to in a standard way you would with president. But then when this happened with the passport scandal with John Brennan, the case died when the main whistleblower, who discovered the hack, who was working with congressional investigators and was set to testify, mysteriously was discovered slumped in his car, dead, before the testimony. So, it was like a gangland style shooting of the person who did the digital forensics on the hack. And John Brennan's firm actually, I believe, even apologized for the hack. I don't think I don't think there's any dispute about that. I think it was just that the whistleblower, had the, all the reporting and the digital forensics type thing. And then you see something like that and it scares you off the trail. Who wants to pursue that story when the guy who was taking the lead of it, ends up, dead shortly before his testimony under mystery conditions where he's just found dead in his car. But, so the Obama situation is one, and even what he's doing right now with the Obama Foundation, it's the same capacity building operation. He's got this fellowship program where they're grooming emerging leaders from around the world, from South America and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia and Central Asia and in all these different industrial fields. And there are now sort of Obama fellows who are getting plugged into the statecraft operations, basically creating little vassal states for the insular industries and regions, and then hooking them up to that State Department complex. And we saw him doing the ambassadorship for censorship work when in his April 2022 disinformation speech, which was one of those harbingers for what you should do if you want to remain in good standing in the Democrat Party, because now President Obama has ordained that the First Amendment is out of date and the government needs to help censor disinformation. But my central focus here is not to get to the bottom of what really were the forces behind Obama in that case, but to say that these are networks, and oftentimes they operate informally. In fact, that is the whole purpose of the CIA plausible deniability doctrine, is that you have informal. You're not getting a W-2 from the agency. You're not necessarily having a national security clearance. You are operating in this purgatory zone where you are not quite a civilian, but you are not technically intelligence. This is, for example, what NDI is, the National Endowment for Democracy, Hunter Biden's, NGO that happened to have been drafted by into existence by the Central Intelligence Agency director to say that we're going to use this to do what the CIA used to do, but it won't have CIA fingerprints on it. That's not technically CIA. But it is a link in the CIA's operational plan, very deliberately so. Everyone that you are liaising with, consensus building with, back channeling with, has intelligence as part of the platter of food items in the room, and so it could very well be something like that. But that's the same thing, and that's what I'm trying to impart to people, that the way this dirty work is organized is much blurrier, broader, and frankly ordinary course than you would expect, in the sense that it's not a huge major deal even that there's an intelligence aspect of something as ordinary course as Coke and Pepsi, as we mentioned. Everyone can look this up right now. In 1973, Richard Helms, the CIA director, met with Kendall Johnson, the chairman of Pepsi Cola, because Pepsi was asking the CIA to overthrow the government of Chile, because they were. I'm not joking. You look at the Pepsi coup in Chile. Literally, Henry Kissinger organized a direct meeting between the head of the CIA, Richard Helms. All this is public knowledge. You can look up the Guardian article on this if you want, or you can go to the NSA archives and look up the actual source documents. But the bottling operation for Pepsi Cola was under attack by the Allende government. That was where the base of their bottling operations were. Also, there are other elements relating to the production, and essentially, Pepsi lobbied the State Department and the CIA to overthrow the government of Chile. They had a two-person meeting directly, the chairman of Pepsi and the CIA director, and then they had a three-person meeting with the CIA-sponsored media oligarch in Chile who ran 27 of the country's largest newspapers, so that they could get the messaging right in Chile about how to overthrow the government, most appropriately. And there were other stakeholders in addition to Pepsi, but they did have literal bilateral trade negotiations between Pepsi Cola and the CIA. And the same thing happens with Exxon. Everyone can read a book called Private Empire about ExxonMobil and these constant interplay, favors for favors that the oil and gas companies have with the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department. Trump even made the chairman of ExxonMobil his first Secretary of State, just to bring that circle about the
personnel.
Role. Yes,
yes.
But in a sense, that's ordinary course. I know it's shocking to a lot of people because they've grown up as conservatives on a sort of Milton Friedman. It's the free market. It's is it really the free market when the market dynamics are 75% of it is determined in terms of who can enter it and, who gets the government licenses and contracts, and frankly, whether you have a market at all, because the intelligence agencies and the State Department and USAID and the Pentagon and the NGO swarms and all the co-opted elements of the media and the universities and the union groups are all tilting towards one side of the competitor's, chessboard there. This was the Burisma operation. Why did Hunter Biden say that he felt serving on Burisma's board was his patriotic duty as an American? What a strange thing to say about making $50,000, $60,000 a month working on a private for-profit gas company of a country 11,000 miles away. Why would that be a patriotic American? Well, it's because if you read his own law firm's memo to the State Department, it pitched Burisma as an instrument of statecraft to be used by the State Department, which the CIA answers to, because it would build up Ukraine's endogenous gas supplies and cut off Russia so that all of the profit for the Russian war machine that comes from the sale of gas from Gazprom into Europe, we won't even have to construct all new pipelines because Ukraine already has those connective pipelines from Russia. We'll simply source it directly from the shale reserves that Burisma holds the mining rights to in the Donbass and in Crimea. It was that private sector, in a fair fight, Gazprom would have won the Milton Friedman market economics because they already had the pipeline set up. They didn't have to do all this massive infrastructure investment in terms of mining and refining. They sold it at a cheaper price and way cheaper than the North American LNG. But the market is corrupted because the Pentagon has spent $200 million, rigging it for Naftagaz and Burisma. The CIA has spent $50 billion. The USAID has spent $15 billion. So, this is every major industry. Sometimes I joke, that they've got the CIA, the Pentagon, the state, they've got big oil, they've got, big gas, they've got big tech, and all we have is big pillow. Right, because of Mike Lindell, who Ann Applebaum, from the Atlantic and those groups, at one point called the biggest threat to democracy because he was like the last remaining large advertiser for Tucker Carlson and other folks. But if the pillow industry ever gets big enough, do not be surprised. And if Big Pillow has a State Department back channel to stop the sale of Russian pillows and you can launder it through whatever predicate, but every major industry has this. Agriculture, energy, technology, it is the process of becoming a global industry, is getting global government battering rams on your side.
So that nicely sets up why Ukraine is so pivotal. What a strange and curious place with so many different competing forces that desire a certain outcome and so many strange connections with Ryan Routh to Ukraine. And Ryan Routh had a firearm pointed with a GoPro. He was proud of this. He was very excited to put this up on WorldStar.
Yep.
The GoPro was ready to show the shot.
Right.
Heard around the world of President Trump getting killed on his golf course. And this guy was all over Ukraine.
Yeah, it was.
And it seems if you're talking about a constellation with Obama, a very strange sort of hologram with Obama where everything's starting to piece together. Ryan Routh's story makes zero sense, bro. What happened there?
Well, we still don't know. I've been shocked at what I've discovered so far, and what we have right now is sort of a dark sky with many stars that point at a very ominous constellation shape. But it's unclear if that is the actual shape or if that's just part of the shape. And I can sort of go over what that shape looks like. But the official story is this was a semi-unemployed construction worker from North Carolina who moved to Hawaii with basically no assets. I think he said in court that he, has no assets. His house is condemned or in foreclosure or something. And all he owns are two trucks with, Biden-Harris bumper stickers on them. And so you look at that and you go, okay, he's a crazy guy, right? Seems like a crazy guy. He was sitting out for however many hours waiting to, and, he's got that weird E. Jean Carroll kind of dead eye stare, where it just looks like he's been just forgot to take the medicine for too many years in a row and now just has it as a permanent state. But there's a lot of things about the Ryan Routh story that I'm hoping investigators are able to be intelligent enough to get to the bottom of, because there's a lot of different parts. This guy was involved in some of the most shocking activity that you can do as an American civilian, and I've never heard of it being done by anybody outside of the intelligence or military world. So let's just, I guess, start at maybe the beginning of the story, maybe almost chronologically. So going back to June 2023, there was this strange situation where Ryan Routh was returning from a trip to Ukraine, Poland, Romania, and Taiwan. And he was returning to his home in Hawaii, and he was stopped by Customs and Border Patrol. Customs and Border Patrol basically said he's got a very fishy story. It was inconsistent, and it was kind of shocking what he told us he was doing. He told us that he was the director of a group called the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine, and that he was recruiting paramilitary extremist militants to come from Pakistan, Iran, Syria, and Afghanistan, including Afghani special forces, military folks, to come to Ukraine to get visas for them, to acquire their passports so that he could work to get them visas. Stop me where that sounds familiar. So that they could fight and die for the CIA and Pentagon's war in Ukraine. And we asked him, where did you get the money for this? And he said, I got it from my wife. So that's the official story, is that he handed them a card where he claimed to be the director of the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine, which was a clearinghouse for bringing fighters from around the world to Ukraine to fight against the Russians there. And that the money comes from the wife, is what he said. Then you have the situation where Customs and Border Patrol found this extremely disturbing and referred the investigation of Ryan Routh to the Department of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. Now, I've been on a journalistic warpath on the HSI beat for several years now, because HSI is this recurring player in federal operations that are just dark, almost beyond comprehension. I mean, the fact is HSI was all over January 6th. Everyone can look up the case of Jeremy Brown. I've talked about this many times before. Jeremy Brown actually posted the 45-minute audio of his recordings with two HSI agents ahead of January 6th, poaching him to become an informant against the Oath Keepers, and that they effectively threatened him if he didn't, and used the carrots and sticks, basically said, you'll make some side money, it'll be good for you, it'll be good for your career, we can even maybe get you a full-time job if you do well in this assignment. And he told them that he didn't want to. They still called him anyway 2 times on January 6th to see what his position was. This was actually, it was even cited in his own indictment when they later ran this operation. He didn't go into the Capitol, but they basically took him out because he posted the video and was threatening to testify in other cases. But HSI was infiltrating all of the groups on January 6th, the big 3 militias that we heard so much about, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and the 3 Percenters. HSI was infiltrating all of them. HSI then had this strange role in the Matthew Crook's Assassination attempt number 1. If folks remember, it was reported by the New York Post that serendipitously Matthew Crooks happened to be training gun training at the same facility used by DHS. Well, HSI are the undercovers and folks. So when I hear it's a DHS training shooting range, surely there's going to be HSI folks there. And again, HSI does the undercover recruiting. So was there an HSI infiltration of the group chats that Ryan Routh was on? Because then it gets weirder. It turned out that there was a diminished Secret Service force because of the NATO summit, we were told, even though the NATO summit had ended 3 days earlier. And because Jill Biden was on a foreign trip overseas, and so Secret Service was dispatched to her. So they had an understaffed capacity for Secret Service to defend Trump at the Butler rally. And so they offset those Secret Service agents with new people from HSI. So if HSI had a small compartmentalized cell involved in an informant network with advance awareness that Ryan Routh was going to do the killing, and HSI had a small compartmentalized group actually tasked with defending the rally, the entire assassination attempt could have been a small 3 to 4 person rogue cell within DHS's HSI that could have done the whole thing under the table and wouldn't need to have Secret Service blessing, wouldn't need to have the FBI or Justice Department oversight of it. And they could have simply known it was going to happen and allowed it to happen, because an HSI informant could have been on one of the multiple group chats that we say that they know that he was a part of, though they say they were using encrypted apps. But they could have had advanced knowledge of it. What if, we were told by a whistleblower that there was supposed to be somebody up on the roof defending it, but that a decision was made that it was too hot that day and that they decided not to. Well, was the person who was supposed to be guarding it HSI? If it was, well, I don't know the answer. But these are questions for investigators. And so I'm just covering this, not making a facial allegation. But who were those HSI folks who replaced Secret Service? Were they the ones involved in, the SWAT team supposed to be looking out on the roof? Were they the ones who were supposed to be guarding the roof? Were they the ones who were supposed to notify people in terms of spotting Routh 26 minutes earlier? Because if they were, and if it turns out that HSI actually knew about Ryan Routh's plans ahead of time, if there was an HSI undercover in these signal chats, or who told Matthew Crooks to use a different encrypted chat app, then the whole thing could have been done so elegantly, so simply, and they could have simply said, it was just negligence. We heard it. We weren't sure he was going to do it, because this is exactly what they did in 2015 with the Garland, Texas shooting, which was Obama's predicate to declare war on Syria. This was this case in Garland, Texas. There was this, homegrown ISIS threat that these ISIS terrorists showed up in Garland, Texas and shot up a security guard. And, there was a big attempted murder trial. The entire news cycle went by. The entire murder trial went by. It was not until 2 years after the murder trial, because a civic-minded whistleblower at the Arizona FBI field office decided to leak files to the defense counsel saying, you got screwed here. It turned out that the FBI, we knew that this was going to happen. We actually paid an informant $125,000 to become the shooter's best friend. And our undercover in this guy's group chats, talking to him by phone. Again, the entire news cycle and murder trial went by without this becoming public knowledge. It took years. That he told him that the undercover was the one who pushed the person to do it and said, quote, tear up Texas. And then when he texted that to the ISIS, when the FBI texted that to the ISIS guy actually responded and said, you don't need to say it like that. Don't be so direct. Literally, the ISIS terrorist was telling the Fed, who he didn't know was a Fed, he thought he was his best friend, to stop Fed posting so hard. And then it got worse. It turned out not only did we tell them to do it, but there was an unmarked FBI vehicle that tailed the ISIS shooter from his apartment to the venue that he shot up the whole way, even taking pictures as the guy, got out of his car to do the shooting, allowed the shooting to happen, allowed us to go to war against Syria on the basis of this, pattern of domestic homegrown ISIS attacks that were threatening to take over our youth and were the first iteration of internet censorship. We created the State Department's Global Engagement Center because people in America are being recruited by ISIS on Facebook and Twitter. And we know this is a problem because of the Garland, Texas attack. Well, it took 4 years for it to come out that the Garland, Texas attack was an FBI Texas attack. We told them to do it. We persuaded to do it. We even brought along a friggin' Instagram photographer to capture the whole thing on a GoPro, so to speak. What if that comes out 3 years from now, 4 years from now, that happened? Well, and what they'll do is they can make the argument, oh, it's negligence. Yeah, there was some reporting on it, but, it wasn't actionable intelligence. Yeah, we were in the group chat, but he was using cryptic language. You can't see what the group chat actually said. And so HSI needs to be tracked down on this by investigators, and we need the specific names of the HSI people assigned to Butler, Pennsylvania, the HSI people who were involved at that gun rage that Crook shared, and all of the communications that those HSI folks had. Now, that's going to be tough to do because they have a bad habit of deleting their phones, as they did after January 6th when it turned out that, with the whole pipe bomb situation, and as soon as the reporting came out that Kamala Harris was at the DNC building, DNC wiped Secret Service wiped all their phones. DHS wiped their phones, just like the FBI wiped their phones when the Crossfire Hurricane requests came in from further communications after the Peter Strzok disaster. So anyway, so HSI declines to investigate Ryan Routh, even though he's referred to by Customs and Border Patrol. A former CIA targeting officer, I believe, Sarah Adams, had put out a bolo on Ryan Routh as well. Be on the lookout for this exact visa scam. Actually, maybe I should describe the visa scam because this gets to the heart of the matter. So I mentioned he presented Customs and Border Patrol in 2023 with a card saying that he's the director of the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine, which was bringing in militants from all these CIA hot zones. Again, every single one of those countries that he mentioned and that he had gone to and that he was recruiting people from are CIA hot zones. The Afghani Special Forces, again, they were created by us. They were created by the Central Intelligence Agency. They were capacity built by the U.S. Pentagon. Not just in this Zbigniew Brzezinski 1979 era. Hillary Clinton, you can go right now to wikileaks.org and look at, or whatever the dot of it is, and look up the Hillary Clinton ISIS is on our side in Syria email, where she's talking with Jake Sullivan and the lot, and basically saying no. Actually, we want to support ISIS in against Bashar al-Assad. Now, again, ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and right there, the Secretary of State is stipulating that ISIS is good in Syria because they were the ones who were attacking the State Department's enemy, Bashar al-Assad. If you remember, it was an ISIS attack in against the Moscow theater just a few months ago. The two people from Dagestan, who it was claimed that they were basically part of this ISIS network. So serendipitously, once again, the State Department's enemies are destroyed by ISIS with mass casualty terrorism events. So then you have the situation in Africa. Russian military is the backstop for almost all of the State Department's enemies in Africa. What's happening right now in Chad and Niger and Cote d'Ivoire and the whole Sahel region is basically dominated by African militaries supported by Russian paramilitaries. And they are the ones who are basically kicking American and French diplomatic and commercial interests out of the region, out of those precious mining operations. And our way of fighting back has been effectively pumping up Islamic terrorism, ISIS groups, against the Russians in Africa. This is who's killing the Russians there. So once again, ISIS is on our side in Afghanistan. ISIS is on our side in Syria. ISIS is on our side in Africa. And Who is it? So Ryan Routh, what was his operation? Let's just start there. Ryan Routh, his operation was trawling social media and Telegram and WhatsApp for Islamic fundamentalist fighters from Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria, and getting them to text him front and back pictures of their passports. This was his whole thing. Passports, 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 passports. If you go to any of the archived, saved files for the trove of Ryan Routh social media and you run a Control F for password, you're going to see like 8,000 hits. It's all the guy ever talked about. Passports, passports, passports. I need your passports. Now, why was he collecting all these passports? He claimed, by the way, to have 5,000, a stack of 5,000 passports just from Afghanistan fighters alone. 5,000. So just to put that in context, the country of France has its economic basin in its post-colonial empire in North Africa and in Western Africa. It's where they draw much of their mineral resources, their energy resources, their agriculture resources. And so they maintain a heavy military presence, the French army does, in Africa in order to protect those economic and diplomatic interests. The largest country, the largest force of the French military in all Africa stood at about 5,500 troops. So Ryan Routh alone claimed to have raised an army the size of the entire French military in Africa, effectively, through constantly pitching people all over social media from Afghanistan. That's just from Afghanistan, and then you take the Pakistanis. He claimed to have thousands here, thousands there, and his whole operation was taking the front and back of the passports, the stacks of passports, and getting them no-look visas by working with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Does that sound familiar? I think we started this story by talking about how is that exact embassy that overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014. That was the Jeff Pyatt, Victoria Nuland, home court. Now, and so Ryan Routh is constantly doing this or posting on social media that he's working with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. He's giving updates. He's saying they've been sent to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev is processing them. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev is financing this. Now, at one point, he started to get upset and was complaining that he was not able to get traction with these. So I just want to steelman the case that I'm presenting here, which is that Routh did say at one point that he was frustrated at how non-cooperative the U.S. Embassy in Kiev was being with respect to batches of these passports. And the trail sort of drops off. So we don't know the full extent to which these passports were converted into visas. But guess what? We have the WhatsApp number because he posted it all over social media. So, right, FBI, if you're listening and want to solve the case, you can literally just find all the names of the people in the passports and then just simply see whether they were granted visas. Because here's the thing, this is dirty work. If you were doing this, you would relay, hey, you know what? You didn't get it, but get on a plane and come here anyway, which is what he told everyone to do. His website, his slick website that he ran, has in big black bold at the top of the page twice, do not alert your local government that you are traveling to Ukraine. Do not alert the American government. Get on a plane and simply get on a plane, meet us at this location. We'll make sure that your visas are in tow. So as long as there's no federal investigation into that simply does the same matching thing that you do in standard digital forensics, you literally have everyone he was talking with from Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, Iran. You have the front and back of their passports. Unless John Brennan hacks the passport office again, those names should match. Now it gets crazier. So again, he was at the very least back channeling with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, but we don't know if he was successful in those back channels. He was optimistic about it. He became pessimistic about it. The trail sort of dips off. And by the way, if you read Visas for Terrorists by Michael Springman, he describes how the structure of the recruiting of CIA paramilitaries for these visas are structured in a way that is shockingly similar to the Ryan Routh story. He describes this Byzantine labyrinthine, layer of plausible deniability links in the chain. So it's not the CIA directly recruiting people. They have webs of contractors and subcontractors and subcontractors of subcontractors and subcontractors of subcontractors, and they have hundreds of people who are 12 links removed from the agency. They're a friend of a friend. They're a first cousin of somebody who's a subcontractor who just wants some extra dough because they're broke, like Routh was, and they just have a side gig, almost like an advertising agency, where you're trying to do marketing referrals or something. So you're just collecting email addresses and trying to convert. You're trying to convert into a funnel to buy the product. That you have these people who are doing this, trawling these networks to get conversions for people to come to the military. So they don't need to necessarily have to have a military background for that. They're many links removed. So if something happens to them, they've never worked for the agency. They've never worked for the Defense Department. They don't have a work history that would even suggest that. They've got some distant friend or family member who they themselves are somewhat distant because they themselves are a subcontractor and whatnot. And then they simply have a case officer who's monitoring what all the spindles in this particular region or this particular operation are doing, and they've got periodic updates on the amount of conversions. So the whole thing can be highly compartmentalized in that way, and highly deniable in that way. But then getting back to the this passports for no-look visas scam. Here's a funny situation. Getting back to this sort of John Brennan miracle promotion arc. We talked about how John Brennan should have been either fired or prosecuted for
in Guantanamo Bay
for getting passports for 9/11 visas for 9/11 hijackers, and then hacking into the State Department's passport database. But then he becomes the head of the entire agency. Well, Mayorkas, the head of DHS, everyone right now can look up a New York Times article from 2015 about the no-look visa scam that the deputy secretary of DHS had at the time, the then deputy secretary. His name was Alejandro Mayorkas. Let me know if that name sounds familiar. In 2015, he got in a lot of trouble. The Office of the Inspector General, Obama's Office of Inspector General, thought what he was doing with no-look visas on scammy passports was so corrupt that even Obama's DHS Inspector General issued a whole report on the scandal of Mayorkas's fast-tracking of visas. Now, in that case, he was doing it for, basically people who were foreign investors who were friends of Hillary Clinton, who were friends of major Democratic figures, people who wanted to invest in casinos for Democrats, people who wanted to invest in energy projects for Democrats. But he was fast tracking these visas, and very blatantly he was running over the people at DHS who were saying this is not the standard process. We need to run the traps on this, and Mayorkas was speed running the visas. Well, lo and behold, again, now that Mayorkas is the head of DHS, Customs and Border Patrol reports Ryan Routh to Mayorkas, to DHS, HSI, because of the no-look visa scam. And the way Customs and Border Patrol put it was very fascinating too, because they didn't just say we referred it to HSI and they declined to look into it. They neglected to look into it. They said they refused to look into it, which, to me, subcommunicates we wanted them to. We insisted they did, but they refused. And so was Mayorkas' DHS protecting a guy who was helping the Biden administration's U.S. military and CIA? Because that's what this war was and is. This is and look no further than the New York Times for reporting on this and the importance of all the CIA operations in Ukraine and how we need to, how Mike Johnson had to give $60 billion to Ukraine in a new infusion 6 months ago because the whole thing is run by the CIA, and you're going to leave our CIA hanging high and dry, and all these, turns out basically everybody in Ukrainian intelligence is being directed by the CIA there, and you're going to leave them out to dry, and you're going to have dead CIA agents if they don't get the $60 billion. The blood's going to be on your hands, Mike Johnson. We've got 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. And so this is who, so Ryan Routh, by the way, if you are a 56-year-old unemployed construction worker, how do you get access to Afghan special forces? How do you get now? What's really funny, in one of his own communications,
where do you even get the money to fly to Ukraine?
Yeah,
it's tens of thousands of dollars to do these trips.
Yeah.
To
fly there, hotels, travel, transport.
Right.
But and we'll get to that funding thing in a second here. But you have every single one of these. So another thing that he said with getting the Afghan special forces passports is one of the things they said. That Routh said publicly was, well, we could go to Pakistan because Pakistan is corrupt and it should be easy to get them there, which is very funny, of course, because Pakistan, we sort of started this by talking about how Pakistan is corrupt because it's our corruption, right? It's our bastards, so to speak. We made Pakistan corrupt. We created the CIA corrupt bank, BCCI. We turned Pakistan into the narco trafficking, black market arms trafficking zone from the 1970s to present. To date, Pakistan is the main military transshipment into Romania and into Ukraine from there for the weapons that we deposit to Pakistan. We overthrew the government of Pakistan in a coup just 18 months ago. But so this guy, unemployed construction worker from North Carolina, is able to go to ISIS groups in Syria, to Afghani special forces, to Pakistani paramilitary groups, back channel with them, back channel with the State Department U.S. Embassy, back channel with the NGO swarm through the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine, give detailed logistical instructions, as he does on his website, which airports to fly into, depending on whether you're flying into Poland or Ukraine, which bus lines to take to get from there if you can't afford a second line of airfare, what the geolocation coordinates are for where to meet with the different legions once you get here, depending on what operation you want to participate in. By the way, Ryan Routh also delivered 120 military drones to Ukraine and took pictures of it on social media. Where did he get the money for the flights? Where did he get the money for 120 military drones?
Yeah, right.
By the way, you know who runs our drone program? The CIA. So, while he's supposed to be sorry, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much and going a million miles a minute.
It's almost hard. It's almost hard to believe it. It's like you couldn't even write a Hollywood script as dark as this. So you're establishing that Routh was a tool of a cutout of a cutout of a cutout, because normal people, one, don't have the finances to do this, two, would never think to start running a passport operation for a bunch of militants. It's an insane thing for somebody to do. And all of it the constellation points to him being in some type of capture.
Here's the way that Michael Springman described it in Visas for Terrorists. And again, this is not some random guy off the street halfway into a beer telling you this. This is the guy who is the head of the visa section for the U.S. consulate in Saudi Arabia. He said that the structuring of the recruitment process was designed to have so many layers of plausibility and so many links in the chain that it would not be obvious to people on either side of the process, either the people being recruited or the State Department oversight, that this was part of a CIA recruitment operation. Now, And he goes over, several of those structures in the book and in his interviews. And you can look this up on YouTube or BitChute or any place. This is all publicly available. I think his book was 2015 or 2017. But it's possible. So, I mean, I would not go so far as to say the word asset because asset usually implies
like
a pawn piece of significance.
Yeah.
But it's a link in a chain. And it's possible that Routh himself was not even informed of the nature of what he was doing. And
his first follow on X was a CIA agent.
Right. Well, because of the Taiwan, right? That was the whole South Korea Sue Kim,
yeah,
right?
Like a murky, very...
Well, because Taiwan, was our first big Pacific, CIA zone. I mean, Taiwan was created when the War Department was backing the Chinese nationalists against the Chinese communists in the 1930s and 40s, also running the drugs for guns for cash operation to fund that. This is our first time. This is the War Department, our now Defense Department, but it was the War Department in the 1930s, and now the CIA does this in large part, but this is before the CIA was created. We were taking the drugs that the Kuomintang sat on in the Golden Triangle, and we were converting the opium to cash and buying drugs with it, and then supplying that for the war effort. The CIA got in a lot of trouble in this in the 1970s when a bunch of CIA drug running banks. Everyone can look up a bank called Nugan Hand in Australia, which was one of the big CIA proprietary banks used to launder drug money for proxy wars in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Taiwan. But the island of Taiwan came about because it was the island of Formosa, which was the place that our losing fighters fled to. The Chinese nationalists fled when they lost against Mao. They fled to Taiwan. They were a narco army who was funded by the drug proceeds that were flown out of U.S. military aircraft to turn into proxy war funds. That continued out of Taiwan, and Taiwan has served as this big beachhead, along with South Korea, since 1949, 1950 with the Korean War. But, so the fact that she was that particular CIA individual was, focused on South Korea, and that Ryan Routh had all these weird touch points with Taiwan. Remember, he was living in Hawaii. He had moved to Hawaii from North Carolina, and Hawaii is the closest place you can get to Taiwan, obviously, from the American homeland. But this is one of these. It's the only through line that connects Taiwan to Afghanistan and Pakistan and Syria. The only commonality point that all of these places have is that they're CIA hot zones. But getting back to this, it's very possible that Routh himself did not know, when he was working as he claimed to be the director of the International Volunteer Center, although my understanding is that the International Volunteer Center put out a public statement that they have no affiliation, but that's not under oath. Those documents are not subpoenaed by federal law enforcement or by the parallel legal investigation being conducted by the state of Florida. They should be, and when you hear how deep that rabbit hole goes, I think everyone will agree they should be. And we can get to that, I guess, a little bit later in the story. But what I'm getting at here is it's possible that he was told that he was participating in an NGO operation in Ukraine with this International Volunteer Center, and that it was military logistical support and humanitarian aid and recruit people for that. And he was told by a friend or a family member or a former, work person. He grew up in North Carolina, which is where Fort Bragg is. It's the largest psychological operations center in the entirety of the U.S. It's Special Forces headquarters. Special Forces is a key link in this chain of paramilitary recruiting because the CIA syncs up with Special Forces on all things. And of course, Ryan Routh was recruiting Afghan Special Forces, which was a creation of our Special Forces when we created their Foreign Internal Defense Force, when we had Hamid Karzai and his brother, the drug warlord, there after we took over the country in the early 2000s. But what I'm getting at is there is this vast in-between, this interstitial purgatory zone between formal intelligence work and normal civilian life. And it's this plausibly deniable, semi-civilian NGO sphere that happens to be laced top to bottom by intelligence operatives, intelligence funding, intelligence networks. And if Michael Springman said in 1998 the process was designed to be so opaque that people at the State Department on first review would not be able to tell that this was an intelligence operation, if it was constructed so elaborately in terms of the plausible deniability that even the people on the State Department oversight side would not know that that was the case unless they had special compartmentalized information relating to its CIA touchpoints, then it's quite possible it's the same on the other side of the recruiting process, the other side of the process, which is that there could be 100, 200, 1,000 people like Ryan Routh simply getting passports in the way that a marketer or a job recruiter actually is maybe the better example. A job recruiter plays the numbers game. Hey, we found you on LinkedIn. Here's a new job for you. But they send it to 11,000 people just hoping that, 1% joins the funnel. Well, it's the same thing on this. They're just scouring all of Afghanistan Telegram, scouring all of Syria WhatsApp. Hey, do you want to fight and die in Ukraine? Hey, you hate the Russians. Here's the better opportunity for you. And so it's unclear where Routh was situated in that, but there's another angle of it which I think helps elucidate it a little bit. But I'll pause because I know I've been.
No, that's the question. Because that's where this is all public information, and most people who've been tuned into the story at all, they know that Routh was doing this, and they know that this is not normal behavior. There are a lot of big questions that remain unanswered. Hopefully, an investigation gets to the bottom of it. Why did he try and kill Trump?
Because Trump opposed the Seize Eurasia. For the same reason that they went after Imran Khan, because Trump took an aggressively neutral position. Remember, in that State Department cable, you can look this up on The Intercept right now, or you can go to my timeline on X at Mike Benz Cyber and just type in the phrase aggressively neutral position, and you will see the whole video clip, the whole source documents right there on screen. That was why they did a coup to overthrow the most popular president that Pakistan ever had in 2021. Simply because he was taking an aggressively neutral position, and Pakistani neutrality would be enough to sink an already sensitive losing situation against Russia in the war. Because Pakistan is so vital because of all the military equipment that gets shipped into Ukraine from Pakistan. So if one of the largest arms suppliers or arms transshipment conduits decides, hey, we're not going to piss off Russia by having Pakistan serve as this pass-through to kill all these Russians, well, then now NATO's screwed. Not because Imran Khan loves Russia, just because he's neutral. It's the same thing with Trump. I don't think Trump had any clue what the size and the venom strength of the rattlesnake that he stepped on when it came to his posture on Russia when he won the presidency in 2016. I think he assumed it was the New York Times version of the story. Like, Russians are bad, but, we're not doing anything bad on the other side here. There's no sensitive special ongoing operation where these billions in humanitarian aid that we're giving to Ukraine is actually going to build a sophisticated CIA paramilitary force to militarily reconquer eastern Ukraine by taking it town by town and then having Ukrainian civic engineers rebuild the towns the CIA just overtook to build exploration rigs for Royal Dutch Shell and Chevron, who happen to have $10 billion deals with Naftagaz to process the gas from Burisma. But Trump had no idea how much money had come in from the BlackRock world from the oil and gas world, from the the rare earth and precious mineral world that was wholly reliant on the military reconquest of eastern Ukraine after the disaster of 2014 Crimea and Donbass secession. And that you had hundreds of billions of dollars that would go to donuts if an aggressively neutral position were taken. And that there could be trillions of dollars in profit if maximum war on Russia was ramped up and we could take the territory back. And so I think Trump did not appreciate the horns of the bull that he was messing with when he simply said, hey, Russia's not our enemy. I don't love Russia. I don't hate Russia. I get along with everyone. Don't we want peace? Well, peace in post-2014 coup in Crimea, peace means we lose all of eastern Ukraine. Peace means we lose all of Crimea. Peace means we lose the Black Sea. So peace means a big fat L for the blob and a big fat black hole in the bottom line of a dozen of the world's largest oil, gas, rare earth mineral, and agriculture companies. So you have both the government side of the blob, the intelligence side of the blob, the corporate and financial side of the blob, all getting royally screwed. Some of them, could be very fragile because of the size of the investment. And so it's an already fragile situation, and being neutral on it could kill the whole thing. And so that is why I predicted this months before he was assassinated. I was asked at one of my office hours if I thought Trump might get assassinated. This was about 3 months before the first assassination attempt. And I said that's unlikely unless he threatens to upend the Seize Eurasia playbook. That's the one thing that they would kill him for. And, so Eurasia is this, the big landmass, that's basically extends, from Siberia into Central and Eastern Europe. It's called the world island. The Mackinder hypothesis, folks can look this up from the early 1900s. It's the linchpin of Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard theory, which is that Eurasia is the master island because it is 2/3 of all the world's natural resources, and is basically he who controls the master island of Eurasia controls the world. And so we have to seize this. And, I've said this before, but folks can look up just in terms of raw resources. I've said this before, Russia, sits on $75 trillion worth of natural resources. The U.S. only sits on $45 trillion. So, if you can imagine as a enterprising capitalist nation, how much windfall profits could be seized if we were simply able to seize the physical territory, which NATO has been doing inch by inch since 1990, and tried to do in a giant hungry hippo gobbling attempt in March 2014 with the Ukraine coup, but then got totally destroyed with the counter coup when the Donbass broke away and Crimea voted to secede and Russia did the military backstopping. But we want it all. We want Ukraine. We want Kazakhstan. We want Uzbekistan. We want Turkmenistan. And we want Russia itself. And every aspect of our foreign policy is geared around maximizing that territorial acquisition. And all of these, there's a massive insider trading thing that happens in this. This is how George Soros went from a millionaire to a billionaire. This is a very common thing. This is why all these 4-star military generals are now getting jobs as macroeconomic forecasters at Goldman Sachs and at the BlackRock Investment Institute, because they have this magic clairvoyance about what's going to happen to various industrial sectors, because they know what the CIA is going to do in the region. Well, when the State Department, through its stakeholder dialogue with all these different companies, says it's going to do this in Turkmenistan, well, then the money starts to flow from Goldman Sachs and from the BlackRock Investment Institute and from all the different private sector portfolio companies and from London and Wall Street and all the the futures funds and the commodity funds and the foreign exchange currency speculation funds, because everyone knows that's what's We're going to overthrow this country in 6 months. We're going to take over this region. They're going to send in the Marines. They're going to send in the special forces. This person is going to get $200 million and they're going to win the election, and they're going to greenlight this regulatory thing. So everyone pre-piles in. If someone, if some reality TV show host wins a social media election and says, hey, you know what? It's kind of foobar what we're doing with this Russia situation. And everyone says, whoa, 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 whoa. What? I thought we were doing this Coke and Pepsi thing. If Romney was down with it, Obama was down with it, McCain was down with it, Hillary Clinton was down with it. Who is this guy? Yeah. He must be a Russian, And so what I'm saying is there's so much preloading of that on the profit side, what stands to gain and how much you will lose simply by doing what's right for humanity instead of what's best for this sort of insider trading, military-industrial corporate complex.
Have you told us everything that there is to know right now that you can tell us about Ryan Routh, or is there any other holes in the story?
Well, there are things that I don't know, but that I think investigators should be apprised of because they're unexplored and they're quite interesting, and it has to do with Ryan Routh's network in Ukraine and sources of funding. So we have this discrepancy in the story where Ryan Routh said that he was the director of this group called the International Volunteer Center, which is a very interesting operation that involves the shipping of these CI paramilitary groups to help the Pentagon's war in Ukraine, and it's this big clearinghouse there. Now, my understanding is, and this was referred, I have a source named Gecko, I just want to make sure I give credit here, who discovered some of this information and passed it on to me. And I'm not making any facial claims when I say this about the individuals around this or the network. Again, I'm not making any facial claims about it. I'm simply raising the facts as they are open source reported and asking investigators who are working with Florida and any parallel investigation to simply ask the relevant questions to run the traps and just make sure everything's okay here. But this group, International Volunteer Center, my understanding based on the 501c3 paperwork, gets its 501c3 through a group called Mother of Ukraine, MOU. And Mother of Ukraine is run by an individual who also put out a statement, not unsimilar, if you remember this $150,000 bounty letter that Routh did where I want Trump dead. Well, Ryan Routh was not alone over there at the International Volunteer Center making those claims. So did the individual who's listed on the 501c3 tax form as the contact person for the International Volunteer Center, who made Facebook posts and other communications saying the only good Trump is a dead Trump, and basically signaling that he wants Trump dead. This guy, while Ryan Routh was claiming to be the director of the International Volunteer Center, which gets its 501c3 as a dark money pool from Mother of Ukraine. So there's this question of, well, where did the money come from for this guy? We don't know if it's the wife, as he said, or if there was some mystery, off the books type funding situation that was putting money in a bank account that he was simply not reporting. We don't know his IRS situation. We know that he's had something like 74 different arrests and 100 different charges over his lifetime, but never spent a day in jail. But you have this situation where the group he claimed to be the director of is actually a dark money C3. So it's not technically, because a 501c3 has to report publicly how much money it brings in. But you can have affiliate projects of a C3 that get their C3 through that project that don't need to report. So it could be an infinite. I mean, it could be as much money as the entire mothership, has. You don't know, and you don't know where it goes from there. And Routh was operating. He claimed to be the director of one of these dark money pools. Well, what is that dark money pool from? It's from this Mother of Ukraine organization, who's run by a guy who also wrote publicly on Facebook, the only good Trump is a dead Trump, with a picture of Trump in a casket and saying, things like the only thing that he wants, is for Trump to be dead and all these things. And he's the one who's listed as the contact person on the 501c3 paperwork of International Volunteer Center, the very thing Ryan Routh told Customs and Border Patrol, U.S. law enforcement, that he was the director of. Then you have this strange situation with Heart of Ukraine, with Mother of Ukraine, which is, how Ryan Routh has been profiled by, how did this crazy unemployed construction worker get profiled by the New York Times, Newsweek, Romania? How I say he's in BlackRock commercials.
Semaphore, yeah,
he's in Azov Battalion commercials. Heart of Ukraine, which gave the organization Routh claimed to be the director of its 501c3 protection, its dark money protection. And if he was at the International Volunteer Center, even though, again, they've publicly denied it, but not under oath, and so investigators should be put under oath, I believe, in order so we can have confidence that there's no ambiguity. Well, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of an organization called Voice of America. Voice of America was one of the original CIA proprietary media organizations created in the 1940s and 1950s, back when the CIA used to run its media proprietaries directly. Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, these were all run from 1950 to 1970 directly by the Central Intelligence Agency. And then they were turned over because of the scandal of the CIA just literally running the media. They did the same thing that they did with the National Endowment for Democracy, and the CIA said, no, okay, we're going to keep the same staff and the same editorial line and the same distribution structure and the same affiliate networks in all the different countries on Earth. But instead of having it be run by the Central Intelligence Agency, we're going to turn it over to the Board of Broadcast Governors. And it's just going to be a totally independent group, nothing to see here, but it's going to report to Congress, and it's going to get all its money from Congress, just like the CIA did. But it's just not CIA this time. Oh, see, it's like a child, right? Like trying to hide from daddy, like putting on I put a mask over my head. I can't see you, so you can't see me. I'm not in the room. And now it's run by the U.S. Agency for Global Media. It was turned over from the Board of Broadcast Governors, former government agency. But Voice of America did this really interesting documentary, a 15-minute glitzy Netflix-style Hollywood production, effectively, of Heart of Ukraine. So not only are they recruiting from CIA paramilitary zones, not only doing the job of CIA paramilitary recruiters, not only are they fighting the CIA's war in Ukraine and coming from the CIA-built fighter forces in Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Pakistan, but CIA media is doing glitzy 15, 20-minute documentaries on them and translating them into like 18 different languages, translating them into Arabic, translating them into Pashto, so that the people who they were recruiting militarily, those countries, so that people in Pakistan and people in Afghanistan and people in Syria could watch the recruiting video for the group that Ryan Routh was getting the no-look passports for, to come there and fight. And that person also said that he wants Trump dead, and the same way Ryan Routh did. So the organization technically providing the funding to the International Volunteer Center feels the same way as Ryan Routh did. And we've been told about this whole bounty situation. Remember, Ryan Routh said that Justice Department said that he wrote this letter, $150,000 bounty in a kill for hire thing. Well, 1 month before Ryan Routh, folks can look this up on CNN, the Justice Department indicted a Pakistani man who was working with Iran. We were told that he had Iranian links to do a bounty on the head assassination plot of Trump. The same thing that Ryan Routh said he was doing. And we don't know about this network through the International Volunteer Center and through Heart of Ukraine, who evidently was chock full of people who also wanted Trump dead. Was their money going to... I don't know the answer to this, and I'm not insinuating this. I genuinely don't know. This is a question for investigators, and this is a great opportunity for the people who are involved in that operation to simply show the documents and put minds at ease that there are no connections here to be worried about. And but this is one of these things where tracing where the money comes from and tracing those documents. But, once again, why is Voice of America doing this glowing? This is not just random independent media. This is intelligence media. So, man, we can end there. I think the second question is on probabilities, and
what is your professional probability that the first assassination attempt was an influenced operation by someone within the federal government, acting either officially or unofficially? Same for the second assassination attempt.
Well, it is hard for me to imagine. I'm trying to be charitable here, and not say what my instinct is, because it doesn't look good for our government. And I want to try as best as I can to allow some sort of breathing room, a kind of sympathy for the devil. And I'm trying to negotiate myself into finding a counter argument that I can be satisfied with. But the fact is, the unexplored HSI component of the Matthew Crook situation, the fact that things like tear up Texas from ISIS in Garland, Texas, that's not ancient history. That happened in 2018, and it wasn't disclosed until 2018. That was during the Trump administration. That's practically yesterday. The Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping plot. And the entire election went by without people knowing that 12 of the 16 people involved in that were federal agents or informants. It is, I don't see a way that there was not federal foreknowledge of the Crooks situation. He set that whole thing up, top to bottom. The Butler rally was not announced until 7 days before it happened, and in that time, he was able to map out the logistics. He was able to get drones to do, flybys to scope the area. He was able to find the one place that was undefended, which happened to be the number one place that you would defend if Secret Service was behaving normally. You have him at the gun range where DHS was, while HSI was deeply involved in the January 6th Fedsurrection. And its role is doing undercover informant recruiting and infiltrating group chats. We're told he had 3 separate encrypted group chats. I can't believe that they were not in the group chats. I don't. I don't know how to assign a number to it without saying 100 and 0. But in my heart, I don't see. If you were to say 99, I would have to debate you half to death over what 1% you're still hanging on to. And I think that federal investigators need to take that same approach. This FBI, this DHS, this Justice Department, this CIA, this DOD is so corrupt that they need to prove to us at this point that they didn't. We watched them do that with January 6th. We watched them do that with the Whitmer Fednapping. We watched them do that with the Garland ISIS plot. The 1993 World Trade Center bomber, Omar Saleh. You can look this up in the New York Times. The guy who planted the explosives at the bottom of the World Trade Center in 1993 did it at the request of his FBI handler. And when the building blew up, he recorded his phone call with his FBI handler saying, I thought you said that you were going to replace the explosives you asked me to plant with fake explosives. Why did you let the World Trade Center blow up? You look in the Oklahoma. At this point, it's the onus is on them to provide the evidence to us. But every time evidence, instead they burn and destroy the evidence. They are quick to disclose things when it's damning to Trump, or they'll put out the bounty with $150,000, but then the FBI will work to indict Michael P. Leahy and the Tennessee Star if they publish the Covenant killer shooting. So I guess what I'm getting at is I believe that in both cases there was federal involvement, and they need to prove to me that it wasn't.
It's dark, dude. bro, that's dark.
It's the world we live in. And
how will Trump
when you adjust your eyes to the light,
survive? You work so hard to get Trump elected. How will he even survive another term? It's with everything that you've just painted, just as a takeaway thought, like how we say pray for Trump, but like he's fighting the forces of evil and darkness that I think very, very few. You may be one of the few on earth that actually even begin to understand.
Well, we actually started the conversation with the answer to this, which is that one way he may survive is by playing ball. If he makes the appropriate concessions and gets a little bit of his agenda done on domestic policy, gets a little bit of, people placed in his careers, makes a little bit of a difference in world history that way, but without doing substantive structural damage to sensitive in-process operations, especially around Eurasia, they may decide it's actually in the blob's interest to let him have a relatively lame presidency with a few wins here and there. And that may be as good as we can hope for now, and then reassess the world in 2028.
Wow. They'll never let RFK get within a like this. RFK, I'm sorry, bro. He's like, sorry, bro. It's cooked for you.
Well, I hear there's a new department of dog catchers opening up, and they'll be okay sticking him there. But I don't know if they give him the range of the CIA or HHS.
Good God. Oh man, that shit's dark. It's weird. It's weird to like. I'd rather know the truth. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather know than to live in ignorance. And I think ignorance is wonderful. Actually, it'd be great to just go and watch NFL games and drink beer and wipe the Cheetos off my chest. But I'd rather know. Benny Brews. Conversations you can only have over a beer. Hulk Hogan beer at that. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Benny.
The great Mike Benz. Cheers.